Hello, everyone, and welcome to San Francisco Opera Guild's preview for Innocence, an opera by Kaya Sariaho. I'm Lauren Erickson, San Francisco Opera Guild board member, and we do have a special treat for you today. This will be a slightly different format than what we typically present. And that's because we have Sofi Oksanen, the original Finnish librettist for the opera, as our guest. And yes, you heard that correctly. This opera has parts sung in Finnish, but it doesn't stop there. I'm not sure if this is a record for languages sung in an opera, but there are 9 of them: English, French, Spanish, Finnish, German, Romanian, Czech, Greek, and Swedish. I just love San Francisco Opera's commitment to bringing new works to our stage. And while this is not a commission for us, it is the American premiere. This opera has already been acclaimed by the New York Times as a masterpiece and was the winner of the 2024 Olivier Award for Best New Opera Production. With that being said, I'd like to give a quick content warning for tonight's chat. Innocence contains graphic depictions of violence, trauma, and mental health. And while many operas contain these themes, this one may hit close to home given its modern setting. And we will be discussing these depictions and other potentially disturbing themes throughout the preview. I want to advise anyone who would find these topics disturbing to please take note. Before we jump in, I'd like to share a little bit of information about San Francisco Opera Guild and our mission. We were established in 1939, and the Guild has always been committed to bringing quality education and arts engagement programs to schools and the community. We do this in a lot of ways, focusing primarily on the artistic, academic, and cultural growth of K through 12 student participants. Since opera is a perfect combination of so many art forms: music, theater, design, poetry, and dance, plus language and history, we offer a variety of experiences for schools and classrooms, ranging from writing and performing their own operas in Brook to Bravo and Voices for Social Justice residencies, to performing classic operas alongside professional singers in Opera Together, to experiencing a first taste of opera in the classroom with our extensive Sing a Story program, to experiencing grand live opera in our student dress rehearsal program. We currently partner with hundreds of classrooms all over the San Francisco Bay Area and Northern California. In the community, we offer Summer Conservatory Opera Camp every summer and our award-winning Opera Scouts Young Artist Program for ages 7 to 18. This is so important because arts education funding in schools has slowly evaporated, and sometimes this is their only exposure to performing arts that they get. Each of our programs is designed to ignite a creative spark and grow curiosity about the arts while teaching collaboration, self-esteem, along with critical and metaphorical thinking skills. And it's fun. And for our lifelong learners, we also educate through these opera previews, which brings us to tonight. So welcome and thank you for joining us. One of the most awarded literary authors in Scandinavia, and translated into 46 languages and sold in more than 2 million copies, Finnish-Estonian novelist, librettist, and playwright Sofi Oksanen is an icon of her field. Called a literary phenomenon by the Times, Oksanen has, since her international breakthrough novel, Purge, proved time and time again that she is a mistress of human drama, incorporating historical and contemporary issues that move on the reader. Her most recent work is Same River Twice, Putin's War on Women, a literary essay on colonialism and oppression, women, and war. We are thrilled to have Sofi with us this evening. As always, if you do have questions throughout the event, please drop them in the chat, and we will do our best to address them. Before we get started, we're going to play a short video of an interview with the artistic team, and then we'll turn it over to Max Morgan Butcher, Education Program Manager with San Francisco Opera Guild, who will have a fireside chat, if you will, with Sofi.
Miten ne eri kielivalinnat vaikuttaa siihen, että minkälaisia laulajia? Tai kun nyt oli kuitenkin se, että mukana on myös näyttelijöitä ja puhetta, niin miten se, vaikuttaako se musiikilliseen kokonaisuuteen, dramaturgiaan?
No siis sehän avasi täysin uuden epokin mun musiikissa, täytyy sanoa. Koska siis se oli ajatus, jota mulle ei tullut mieleen. Et se oli ehdotus Aleksilta, joka itse asiassa aika usein, kun me ollaan tehty töitä, niin silloin joku semmoinen, mikähän se olisi kauniisti sanottuna, semmoinen, se haluaa haasteellistaa mut. Ja se auttaa mua siinä, etten mä toista itseäni. Mutta en mä tiedä, mitä sulla oli itse asiassa mielessä, kun sä eka kertaa ehdotit sitä, vai oliko se vaan, koska sinä teet töitä joskus näin?
Niin, no en tiedä, se prosessi on myös sellainen, että kaikki toi vähän pöydälle niin kuin omia työtapojaan ja prosessejaan. Ja siis ennen tätä vaihetta niin mehän puhuttiin kauheasti siitä, mikä on oopperassa mahdollista. Aivan. Siinä oli siitä utelias niin muodollisesti. Joo. Ja sitten kun tämä ensimmäinen librettoversio oli olemassa, jonka nimi oli Kuokka-vieras. Aivan. Niin siinä vaiheessa sitä teksti oli myös, niin kuin se lähti myös siitä tosi konkreettisesta asiasta, että teksti oli kauhean paljon sinun mielestä. Niin
kirjailijan näkökulmasta ei yhtään, niin, mutta siis tiedän, että libretto on niin tiukka.
Niin musta tuntuu, että impulssi oli se, että kun me istuttiin siinä kolmisten ja me ajateltiin, että no, niin tuntuisi turhauttavalta, kun tätä tekstiä on laadittu ja syvennetty, leikata sitä vaan yksinkertaisesti. Niin sen sijaan me mietittiin, että sillä yhden tarinan tasolla, oppilaiden tasolla siis, voidaan tehdä jotain muuta, jos se ratkaistaan muodollisesti toisella tavalla. Jos se kaikki ei olisi laulettua tekstiä, joka vie kauheasti aikaa.
Niin, että se vei vähemmän. Se oli niin kuin myös käytännön ratkaisu.
Niin, mutta ei vaan myös. Niin alunperin se taisi olla se lähtökohta.
Joo,
että me tarvitaan toisia ratkaisuja, että näiden hahmojen psykologinen niin kuin, totuus säilyisi, niin siis ainakin sillä tavalla, jolla Sofi oli sitä kehittänyt.
Niin, ja sitten se, että mä pystyn tekemään tarpeeksi erilaista musiikkia, koska jokainen hahmo mun oopperoissa on yleensä, sillä on oma musiikki.
Niin, eli niitä on yleensä 3 tai 4. Tässä oopperassa on 13.
Niin sitten joka tapauksessa tämä ovenavaus oli sehän oli ihan fantastinen. Mutta ei se olisi vaan pälkähtänyt mun päähän. Koska mä muistan, kun Aleksi sanoi, että no mitä jos puolet olisikin jotain näyttelijöitä tai jotain. Mä olin, että näyttelijöitä, mitä mä nyt niille voin sitten tehdä. Mutta totta kai sitten se alkoi heti aika
sä et myöskään ratkaissut sitä niin mitenkään binaarisesti, että olisi näyttelijät ja laulajat. Ainakin tässä kokoonpanossa, joka meillä oli Exissä, niin monet, jotka laulaa tai siis esittää niin sanottuja näyttelijärooleja, onkin laulajia, siis klassisia laulajia. Monet on näyttelijöitä, joilla on jonkinlainen musiikillinen tausta.
Totta.
Niin ne kaikki elementit, niin se tavat, jolla sä ratkaisit, se et ole niin piirtänyt jotain rajaa näyttelijöiden ja laulajien välillä.
Niin, mutta se olikin se kiinnostava. Se on vähän kiinnostavaa, tai siis vähän tyypillinen tapa mulle muutenkin tehdä töitä, että rajatilat hälvennetään. Että tavallaan on niin kuin selkeästi erilaisia kontrastoivia elementtejä, mutta sitten niiden välillä voi olla, se kontrasti voidaan tuoda esille, mutta sitten myös sitä voidaan varjoida. Ja sitten niinku se on niinku se, että jos valon ja varjon väliin sä zoomaat lähemmäksi ja lähemmäksi, niin sähän et enää sit näe sitä rajaa. Ehkä tää on semmoinen aika yleinen ajatus mun musiikissa.
Katve.
Niin.
Mitä tässä, kun meille kaikille tässä projektissa on ollut jotain, mitä ei ole koskaan ennen aikaisemmin tehty, ja myöskin sellaisia asioita, mitä ollaan tehty, Niin mitkä ne itse asiassa nyt on niin kuin jos pitää sanoa, että mitkä on ne tutut ja vanhat asiat. Että tämä on vähän niin kuin, no häissä ollaan, että onhan nämä vähän niin kuin siis häät siinä mielessä meille kaikille, että jotain vanhaa, jotain uutta, jotain lainattua. Ja mulle tietenkin siis se monikielisyys on niin kuin työssä ja ylisukupolvisuus on työssä, joka konkretisoituu sitten myöskin siinä kirjoittamisessa. Mutta en ollut itse aikaisemmin kirjoittanut librettoa, että se oli niin kuin mulle se uusi asia.
No, mulle oli uutta siis tämä valtava henkilömäärä ja sitten tämä erilaiset tavat käyttää ihmisääntä oopperakontekstissa. Et ei pelkästään sitä klassisesti koulutettua lauluääntä, vaan kaikkia muita tapoja puhua tai puoliksi laulaa. Ja mä katson, että ne oli mulle niin kuin musiikillisesti puhuen uutta.
Niin, no mun puolesta se jakaa niin, että on kuitenkin ollut 2 rooleja ja 2 vaihetta, jotka oli dramaturgi ja kääntäjä. Niin dramaturgina se, että tekee niin jotain, joka on tämän kokoista projektia alusta asti. Ja että ne kaikki mahdollisuudet, joita pystyttiin avaamaan keskustelussa, se oli tosi kiehtovaa, koska dramaturgin työ on tavallaan erittäin vapauttavaa, koska siinä etenkin niin kuin avaa ovia ihmisille ja kertoo mahdollisuuksista ja yrittää vapauttaa heitä. Tehdä sitä niin kuin tällä tasolla, näin monella, näin monitasoisella tarinalla, niin se oli erittäin kiinnostavaa. Löytää tapoja kertoa tämä tarina, oikeastaan löytää tämä tarina alun perin. Mehän tiedettiin niin kuin suurin piirtein, mistä me haluttiin kertoa, mutta ei minkä tarinan kautta.
Aivan, totta.
Se, että tarina on myös niin kuin väline, että sitä luodaan. Se on aika kiinnostavaa. Kääntäjänä tämä on myös tosi hyvin erikoinen projekti tietysti, että kääntää monelle kielelle, näin monelle kielelle.
Hey there, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And hello, Sophie. Welcome to San Francisco Opera Guild's virtual opera preview program. We are so lucky to have you. Sophie, you're muted.
Okay. Now, I'm very happy to be here, of course, to be in San Francisco, but also be here with you in this conversation.
Yes. What did you make of the final dress rehearsal yesterday? Were you able to attend?
Well, of course, I was very, very, very happy and over the moon about the excellent team we have there. You could really actually feel the good energy and the applause already at the dress rehearsal was quite something. So I feel very good at the moment.
That's fabulous. We had huge attendance numbers. It was very highly anticipated and well received. And we're really excited to have such a fresh production to talk about with our audience and to go view. I have some questions that we prepared in advance to ask you, collected from members of the Guild. At the end, audience, please do put your questions in throughout, and we will be taking and discussing all of those a bit later. But something that I would really like to ask to start things off, is there anything that you think our audience really must know before walking into this opera? I don't know, anything like particularly resonant or important that you want them to carry with them?
I prefer not being the person who is giving instructions to interpretations. So I don't want to be the person who is, as an author, is kind of, lurking behind your shoulder and telling you what to feel or what to think about the show. But what I've now learned with our past performances, and with encountering so many people who have already seen the show.
Mm.
To my surprise, very many young people have liked it a lot. And opera is not actually, considered like something for, I don't know, teenagers. They are stuck with Netflix or something else. And if you tell them that, okay, come with me to the opera, then you think that they don't want to join you. But actually, maybe this time I would encourage you to take your teenagers with you. And if they haven't been to opera, maybe this is a chance to get something they can identify with, because the performance is taking place in an international school. So already there are a lot of young people and on stage, but also already, the school environment is something your teenagers will understand. I wasn't kind of expecting to get this much good response from young people. Even, teenagers who haven't ever been to opera before, or think that they don't care about classical music, or let alone contemporary opera at all. But it has stayed with them. And I've actually just recently met on the street a young person who had seen this performance in Finland in 22, and she was still, excited about that. I mean, 2 years after she had seen the performance. So that was a good sign, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to grapple with. It's a really fascinating, dynamic production that tells a really compelling human story. So I'm not super surprised that it's been so popular, but I am really happy to hear it. Um, I'm wondering, it is a very unconventional opera. There are a lot of different musical styles. Um, there are very unique characters in the ways that they're delivering lines and the ways that they're singing. How did you and the artistic team make these choices about how the characters would be depicted musically with the way that they're costumed? Um, is there any way you could speak to that a little bit?
Well, the starting point was pretty practical. Um, Kaya had some ideas she wanted to have in this production. Because, I mean, the first time she asked me if I'd be interested in writing a libretto to her new opera, then of course I said immediately yes. And then I asked, so what do you want me to start with? And she told me that she wanted to write music for different languages. So that was already one cornerstone. So we needed to have characters who speak multiple languages. And then another thing was that she wanted them to be present on stage throughout the whole performance. Now, this might sound like something very easy, but actually from writer's perspective, it's not that easy, because the libretto text is, there's very tight word count for librettos compared to novels. I mean, novel is a monster that takes it all. You don't really need to care about the word count at all. And yet, the limited number of words doesn't mean that the story is smaller or that the dramaturgic lines are smaller. I mean, no, the story needs to be big. It's opera. It asks for big stories, big narrations, and not something very, small. And then you have multiple characters. And my challenge was already in the beginning that how am I going to make these characters round and not flat? I have to give them a reason to be on stage, because otherwise the poor singers will fall asleep on stage if they have to be there for 2 hours with no meaning, purposeful meaning to be there, and I don't want to torment them like that. So I have to give them a reason to be there so that they know why they are on stage. And so that's how I understood that, okay, now we are going to need an event. event that is something that audience recognizes. Like in this case, it's a school and it's a wedding. Something that you don't need to explain to the audience, because when it starts, you need to immediately know where the story is taking place, because I don't have words to explain that, actually, because I don't have enough words. So it has to be something understandable to the audience. And a wedding is symbolically, it's a great event, simply because, well, for practical reasons, you recognize the bride, you recognize the mother-in-law, you recognize the groom, you understand what those people are there for. And again, I don't need to use words to explain that. So in that way, it's practical, but symbolically, of course, everybody knows all the emotions that are involved with the weddings. There are high hopes, all the imagery related to weddings and the great expectations for the future, the happiness, and so on. So there are a lot of emotions involved, so that is very suitable for opera. And then, well, actually the same goes for the school as well. Everybody has been to school and you have some kind of connection to that. So in that way, it felt a good idea to have these. And yeah, that was the kind of the starting point. We did have some other ideas as well. We thought about a trial, for example, because trial is again an event where you can have multiple people present throughout the whole trial. And the audience understands that, okay, that's a judge and that's the prosecutor and that's the perpetrator or maybe the guilty one. So in a way that you know the roles. And again, I don't need to use words for that. But in the end, we ended up with the wedding and the school. So that was these were the practical questions we started with, and the rest just followed.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. And I'm glad you decided on a wedding. I feel like the word juxtaposition is overused, but in this case, I feel like it is applicable and appropriate. It's very jarring to be jumping back and forth between the wedding venue, this occasion of happiness, or like what should be, and a school where a tragic event has taken place. It's a really interesting framing device. So I don't know, great choice. It's really excellent to
Thank
watch.
you.
I'm curious, and I imagine a lot of people are curious about this. A school shooting is a really like unique and fraught event to center a story around, especially like a unique event to center an opera around. And we're curious, where did that idea emerge from? It seems like um, there were several school shootings that really seemed to rock Finnish society in the late 2000s. And I'm wondering if that's part of the reason you chose this subject, if you could speak to that at all.
Yes, definitely. We had the original commissioner was the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden in London. And then, so I knew already from the beginning that we are going to have an international audience. And considering how long it actually takes to create an opera, I knew that I needed to have a subject matter that would be relevant also when we reach to the point that we are almost, that there is a premiere date in our calendar. Because, we started to work with Gaia already 9 years ago.
Wow.
And my deadline was the first deadline, because she cannot start her work before there is at least some sort of, draft and understanding of what's going to happen. So my deadline was the first one. And I knew that, okay, if I take, because that was before we understood that pandemic is going to change the schedules, then I understood anyway that it's going to take at least 5 years before we see the production on stage. And it is very difficult to say, okay, what's relevant in 5 years? But I thought that school shootings is something that we are not going to make this away, actually, in a few years.
Yeah.
And also, I needed to have something that I feel that I have a right to talk about. As a Finn, we do have a history with the school shootings. We just had a few months ago a 12-year-old school shooter in Finland, and now we don't know what to do with this shooter. I mean, the person is 12 years old. We don't have a system what to do with 12-year-old shooter.
Yeah.
And the first school shooting we had was in 1989. And, Finland is a country, even though it's ranking year after year, like a happiest country in the world. And at the same time, we do have school shootings. We have a very high gun. We have a lot of guns in Finland. We are, thinking of the population, we are on the same level with the United States and Yemen. So this is actually unusual in Europe and also in Nordic countries. So this is something that makes Finland a bit different compared to other Nordic countries. We have a lot of gun violence, not only school shootings, but also domestic violence related to guns. So it is something that I think that it is actually it's tough to say this, but I think it is a typical form of violence in Finland. So I felt that this is actually something that I can talk about as a Finn, and it is relevant also internationally, because I wouldn't be comfortable in writing a story about, let's say, oil industry. I have no personal connection to oil industry, except that, of course, I'm using a lot of products where there's oil, but that's not really enough. So
Yeah.
that was something that I was thinking. And when I introduced the idea to Kaija and Alexi, and we pondered, and they felt that it's important as well. And also something that bothered us all is that how killers are described in popular culture. If you think about true crime, which is so popular, it's filled with shooters, killers, murderers.
Mm-hmm.
Nordic crime as well. And I have a feeling that in popular culture, no matter whether it's a TV series, books, podcasts, movies, then and media, there's so much focus on the perpetrator, even though, it should be actually the focus should be on the survivors and the victims. So that is why we didn't want to have the shooter in the story at all. So the shooter is not he's depicted through the eyes of others, but he doesn't have a voice in the libretto at all. We didn't want to have that.
Yeah, that makes sense as an artistic choice. But I think it's really interesting. I don't know, to see the subject of gun violence play out on stage in this way. I think it's a really important thing at this cultural moment. And I wasn't aware of that about Finland. What an unfortunate accomplishment to have such high rates of
Well,
gun ownership.
I'm pretty sure that quite many Finns are very happy if you don't know about Finnish school shootings. But I mean, Wikipedia tells all about it. And actually, I remember one of the school shootings we had in 2007 was a case where I remember the international news about it, and Finland was considered like, I remember how press in UK and in Norway, for example, they were saying like, Finland, they don't have much sun there, that, it makes sense. They are depressed people who drink a lot. So of course, how could they not have the school shootings? And I was kind of, because it was a very stereotypical visual world they were distributing all over the world about Finland as that this kind of place is where school shootings take place. You have a lot of alcohol and depression and so on, and no sun at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Norway, Utøya mass murder took place a few years later, and then they didn't talk about then they didn't think that the reason why there was a mass shooting on Utöi Island, that it was because they don't have enough sunlight. Like they just few years before thought that, okay, Finland, there's no sunlight. Yes, of course you have a school shooting. And when it happened in their own country, then they forgot the stereotypical things as well. But of course, in the States, you know that sunlight has very little to do with whether you have school shootings or not. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I have a related question for you about this actually. In reading the libretto, I thought that there was a certain commentary on Finland that was kind of written into it. If you don't mind, like maybe I'll read just a
Yeah.
couple lines. The character Stella, the bride, she is from Romania, and she's marrying into a Finnish family, and is very excited and hopeful about starting a life in Finland, like away from the poverty of her background. She says, when I first came here, I fell for a city where one can stroll safely at night. I fell for how honest everyone is. But eventually, complexity enters Stella's narrative about Finland. One character who is really upset with the injustice of how the killer is dealt with by the justice system says, justice in this land grants life to a murderer. Would you call that justice? What was the intentionality behind this depiction of Finland and maybe like violence overall when you were writing the libretto?
Uh, well, Finland is a safe country in many ways. Many also, if there are Americans who find love in Finland, and they move to Finland, then they like Finland because you can let your kids run around, walk by themselves to the school. So in many ways, it is a safe country, and yet at the same time, the country can be very safe, and still you can have school shootings. So in that way, if somebody thinks that safety is kind of the key word for not having school shootings, then I think Finland is a good example that it is a very safe country. I mean, the robbery number rate is one of the lowest in the world, probably. So that was something that I was thinking, and because Stella is coming from Romania, where the crime rate is really high. I mean, there's human trafficking. Romania is actually one of the countries where they make cyber attacks all around the world. So there's a lot of cyber criminality in Romania. There's a lot of women's rights are not really on the level they should be. And so in that way, it's definitely easy to say that Romania is not the safe country as such. But again, there's even organ trafficking is something that really is taking place in Romania. It's one of the centers for that as well. If you want to buy a new liver, then Romania helps you. And yet at the same time, they don't actually have school shootings.
Yeah.
So this is a really complicated issue. I wanted to have a country where they have so much crime, and we can not even Romanians think that the country is safe. And yet, so she has very high hopes when she comes to Finland, and everybody thinks that Finland is safe. And yet, at the same time, she's totally. When she finds out about the school shooting, she is, for many reasons, very shocked. And so I wanted to have these two different worlds to come together.
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting story of disillusionment. And I think
Yeah.
it kind of backs away from this idea of like glorifying countries that are wealthier. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it does a very sensitive job of muddying the waters a bit for I don't know, just like the story of how violence plays out in different contexts.
Yeah.
I would love to know, and I think people talk about this a lot, it over the course of the opera, without giving too much away, um, who is innocent and who is guilty becomes a much more complicated story. And I guess I was wondering, why did you choose for it not to be a very straightforward situation where like the killer is the guilty and like his victims are innocent? Why did you choose to make it like such a complex story about human relationships?
I think that is the way I write. Right. I've written 6 novels and a few plays, um, and all of my work actually deals somehow with the traumas, smaller ones or bigger ones, and how it affects throughout the whole life. And what when I think about, and this is something that, well, of course, I know that from the history. I've written historical novels, and in those novels, I write about how the traumas of previous generations are passed on to future generations. But that is something that really started to bother me when I actually met some survivors of extreme violence. And in Finland, the longest sentence you can have is around 12 years. So everybody gets out in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the system we are brought up with. So in a way that I think we are all in a way comfortable. We take it for granted. But when I met these victims and I understood how scared they are when they think that the killer will be out. So they feel, and I hadn't actually thought about it, not in that way, that what it actually means to the survivor to know that the killer will be out. That you have, you have these 10 years, or if it's a first timer, then even might be, out in 5 years with good behavior. And to know that, okay, I have this particular number of years when I know that this person is behind the bars. And after that, I have no idea what the person is, because our system, of course, doesn't tell the survivors. So under which name the perpetrator, after he has served his time, under what name, they cannot give any personal data. They don't even actually tell whether the killer is out. I mean, if they don't give that information at all. And I understood that this is really like, and it started to bother me also because I've met victims who they don't actually dare to touch the topic of violence in public. They don't give interviews. And I always thought that, that for personal reasons, it's understandable, of course. But after talking to them, I understood that it's not only because of that, it's also because they know that the killer is watching TV in prison, and that the person is going to get out in a few years. So I hadn't actually thought about that because I didn't understand, in a way, without that, what does it actually mean that you cannot actually speak out because you don't want to draw the killer's attention, just simply because the person is following the news and have the access to news. And of course, after the killer gets out, then they have all the information in the world and they could watch it. So in a way that it affected the life of these survivors in a way that I couldn't actually see the way they could leave it behind them. I understood that this is something that is going to stay with them forever, and that is also the reason why I wanted to have these characters in the opera, where to show how the violence is actually after the shooting is going to affect the everyday life choices they have, maybe for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And this is something that I'm always the person who is more interested in the small everyday life things, and not actually the big headlines. So this is why I wanted to give this. Well, how does it actually affect your everyday life?
Yeah.
Maybe for decades.
I mean, that's a very interesting answer. I guess in particular because I feel like you really humanize the killer in a lot of ways. Like, he's never given like speaking roles or anything like that, but in the end, he is also a victim, just like everyone in the story. And so I think it was a very balanced way of exploring that subject. And like a compelling choice to have made. Um, but it is tough. I don't know to know what is right with a carceral system of justice.
Mm.
It's really difficult to parse out whether or not I don't know, we exist in a world where justice is possible in the aftermath of events like
Mm.
these. Um, I'm curious as well. There's one character, again, without giving too much away, whose daughter was killed in the shooting, and she plays a big role throughout the opera. She's profoundly angry with the killer's family, is very upset that they have seemingly found a way to move on and to find joy and happiness. And I felt as though you really used her her lens as a framing device to explore the topics in the opera. Why did you give this character so much importance?
Um, well, I think I've written so much about mothers. Well, for multiple reasons, because the role of a mother in this society is so complex, and I guess no matter if someone is blaming mothers or not, then I have a feeling that they always carry the guilt if something goes wrong with their children.
Mhm.
And that is also something that, if you think about school shooters, then I guess everybody in a way, because it's such a extreme form of violence, that how does a child, how a child comes up with this kind of idea, how to, no matter what has happened to you, in a way that, how do you come up with the idea of revenging something that has happened to you with, just destroying the or killing, with mass killing, and I guess quite often the gaze turns towards the family, and but by far I don't think there is one explanation for and we all know that from one family the children can turn out to be so different, so in a way that your surrounding just is, or the childhood home is not an answer actually to anything.
Mm.
And yet I do think that parents probably always think if something goes wrong with the children, and then that is also kind of, it is not something that disappears from their life. They will think that for the rest of their life, like, what did I do wrong? How should I have done differently? But that is typical for that is a typical way of thinking also to other victims of violence, and I think there is gendered perspective on this as well. If we think about rape victims, for example, then the victims are practically always blaming themselves, that I should have done something differently, even though the guilt should be actually on the perpetrator. And there is something that, I think mothers, so that's why I said that there is gender perspective on this, because I think mothers blame themselves more than fathers do. This might be a very general idea, but I have a feeling that, mothers are blaming themselves more than actually fathers.
Yeah, I think you can speak to like female socialization around motherhood
Yeah,
without it being an excessive generalization.
yeah.
Um, that's that's a good point. I would agree. Um, it's it is interesting to see the way that another parent who experienced like a loss when the tragedy happened is really attacking the parents, um, despite the fact that the parents do seem to largely hold themselves responsible um, in different ways and are still racked with guilt and shame over what happened. But it was a sensitive depiction, I think, of that dynamic. I know we might want to pivot to the audience Q&A pretty soon. I wanted to ask maybe just a couple more things. Specifically, I think members of our audience who haven't gotten to see the final dress rehearsal and who are planning to go to a production might be curious about how you and like the artistic team who helped design the production dealt with depicting graphic violence on stage. So like, what are people going to see when they come to Innocence?
Well, I don't think there's violence at all. I mean, compared to what? If you think about what kind of movies we have and TV shows and books, crime, then I don't think you see the violence at all. But I mean, that was also the what me, Alexi, and Kaya. That is our wish, that when you go to see the Innocence, then you don't actually see visible violence. But of course, we don't have a say for future productions. So if someday there will be a director who wants to have a lot of visible violence or shootings on stage, then it's out of my control. But I mean, that is something that I know that me, composer, and the dramaturg Alexi, that is our wish, that there shouldn't be visible violence at all. But as I said, it's and I don't think we have a little bit of blood. That was director's wish on stage, but otherwise the violence is not visible. And I don't actually myself. I think as an author, then I think most of the best art is something that doesn't leave your head. And visible violence is usually the easy way. That is the easiest way to depict violence. I'm more interested in what's happening in your head and how traumas affect you. And I think that is also one way of making productions or stories that actually stay with you, because you have to give enough space for your own imagination. And that is also one way of, I mean, every single person has inside you certain defense mechanisms. So you can actually, adjust the way what you take in. But if there's too visible splatter violence that is just, thrown at you, that's a genre of its own. But I don't favor that genre myself, because I don't think it leaves enough space for imagination.
Yeah.
And besides, also, I'm more interested in the consequences of violence than actually the act of violence itself. That is quite often something that is given so much space on screen and on popular culture. Popular culture is focusing on the act of violence, and I'm more interested in the consequences of violence, the long-term consequences of violence.
Yeah, that does seem like a notable difference between the violence that we see on on TV and the violence that we see in Innocence, where it is largely implied. I would say there wasn't anything super explicit that was like not a violent act, but people responding to like the shooting and then people grappling with it for years later and manifesting various symptoms that resemble PTSD. But I think it's a good choice. It allows you to sort of imagine the trauma and really have to think more about it than it would if you just got to see them enact violence on stage. I think maybe one more question Q&A time. But I guess maybe just to sort of pivot a little bit, this is your first time writing an opera. Do you think you'll write any more? Are you working on anything else for the stage?
I definitely want to write more librettos. It was fun. It was also a challenge for a novelist. And I'm kind of because that was, you know, when I started to work on this piece, my biggest challenge was exactly that. Am I going to be able to squeeze all this into such a limited number of words? And that was, I mean, this practical question was my biggest challenge, and I think I managed to deal with it. I definitely want to do more because writing a novel is such a different way to work. First of all, it's good for a novelist to have something collective between the novels. It freshes up your head to write for the stage, whether it's a play or a libretto, but it's also nice in a way that you have the whole team that is working with you. That's healthy as well, because writing a novel, then you are just sitting on your own. Of course, you have your editor, but otherwise, it's a marathon of being on your own with the text. And so it's good. I do love writing for stage. Because it's collective, but also sometimes writing for the stage kind of calls different stories. Stories that I don't really think that that would be interesting in a novel, or at least for me as an author. So when we started to work on this, and I was thinking about school shooting as a topic as such, then I was pretty confident that I don't want to write a novel about it, but this is something I definitely see as an opera, and that doesn't mean that there couldn't be great novels about school shootings or gun violence. Not at all. I mean, there's a lot of good books as well. But I'm not the one who is going to. It is not likely that I'm going to write a novel about school shooting. Yeah, sometimes, you know, just if you want to write about something, then you have to wait until kind of you get that click in your head that is saying, okay, this is the format that is perfect for this story. And I do like the opera because it's such a different format compared to many other formats. Well, of course, novel, but play as well. And I don't know. Maybe because I was brought up between two different systems, the Soviet Union and my mother is Estonian, and during my childhood years, Estonia was under Soviet occupation, and in Soviet Union, there was a limited number of things you could actually go to watch, let's put it like that. But there was opera, so we did go to opera quite often. So every time we went to see my mother's relatives or something like that, we traveled to Soviet Union, we tried to see opera. And in Finland, I was brought up in a small town called Jyväskylä. They don't have opera at all. So, and opera is in Finland is more like an upper class thing, but in the Soviet Union, it was for everybody, literally for everybody. So I kind of was brought up with opera, which was unusual for a child of my age in Finland. So I was, I was brought up certainly in a certain way with a love for opera, and it has stayed with me. So I'm very happy that actually 2 of my novels have been adapted into opera, and now I had the possibility to work with this production. So what is the fascination of opera to me is because it's the art of the peaks. You can, when you are writing a novel, you have to write the whole mountain, the whole mountain. But if you are writing for opera, you are just writing the peak of the mountain, and yet you have to be able to see the whole mountain yourself, but you are just giving the words for the peaks. And that's so different. It's good for my head, I think.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. And we're really lucky that you gave it a try and did such an amazing job. And I hope you end up doing another opera or maybe several. But let me,
I hope so too.
yeah. I think this might conclude our structured Q&A. So thank you so much for answering the Guild's questions. I think I'll hop off and hand things over to Lauren, who's going to read out some of our audience questions. Okay.
Thanks so much. That was really wonderful. I learned a lot. So a couple questions in the Q&A. The first one is about if someone in the audience wants to be introduced to a novel of yours that's translated to English, what would be a good one for them to start?
Well, it depends on what kind of reader you are. Of my novels, Perch, When the Doves Disappeared, Norma, and Dog Park, these are the titles that are translated into English. Perch and When the Doves Disappeared are historical novels about Soviet occupation of Estonia. And again, speaking of the traumas, how traumas are passed on to future generations. And if you are interested in Russian way of waging a war, then both of them are actually good examples about that. Then Norma is a bit different kind of novel because there are certain magical realism elements in the novel. Even though otherwise I'm a very realistic author, then this was exception. I wanted to do something different. It is related to human trafficking, and then Dog Park is also it's about the recent past of Ukraine. So if you're interested in Ukraine, then actually both Norma and Dog Park might be for you. And if you are interested in the recent past of Ukraine, I mean, how did the war start, for example, then Dog Park might be for you as well. And also, if you are interested in a rather modern form of human trafficking, that is the fertility industry, then Dog Park might be for you as well. And then, as you mentioned, I do have my latest title is Same River Twice, Putin's War on Women, and that is an essay book. Literary essay, and it is coming out in English by HarperCollins as soon as possible. So that was a different kind of writing because it's not fiction, it's a literary essay. But it's not yet out, it is about to come out.
Excellent.
But as I said, I cannot say without knowing more about a reader what would be the best book, but maybe I gave some ideas.
Thank you. Another question you actually answered, which is about if you were an opera fan or had grown up with opera before, and you mentioned that you did. When you were growing up in Estonia, was it only Russian operas that you would see, or were they a variety of languages?
I mean, Russian composers are strong, you know. But you have, when you call someone a Russian composer, then you should also check if Russia or Soviet Union used cultural appropriation, because quite many of the composers might be actually of different ethnic background. No, it was, I mean, opera, in different decades in the Soviet Union, different things were considered politically complicated. So in that way, there were different favored operas, but it was pretty international. But of course, they are focusing more on the Soviet Union's own big names.
Yeah. Okay, switching gears. Does the story of Innocence end on a positive note?
I think so, yeah. I think there is hopeful ending. But again, you know, that's only my opinion. So maybe somebody thinks it different. But I think there are some positive notes.
And we have another chat asking about possibly some type of a similarity between the painting of the Last Supper and the wedding table for dinner within Innocence. Curious your thoughts there, and maybe if we could look at the poster that SF Opera has created for Innocence together, and maybe we could take a look at that.
It is absolutely a very wonderful poster you have there. I'm very happy about that. When we started to work with Gaia about Innocence, Gaia had the idea of fresco, and then we did kind of have a visual memo about different frescoes and Da Vinci's frescoes as well. So there was this idea of a fresco, and I think for her, when she started, you know, before we had the libretto, she was thinking about the opera as a fresco. So this thinking of opera as a fresco was definitely one of the starting points of the whole production. And weirdly, I don't know, Last Supper has been on my table for several occasions over the past few years, because I actually wrote a mini play for National Theatre in Austria, because they commissioned a play about the challenges democratic world is facing, and actually the work in process was the Last Supper. So I don't know, the Last Supper has been on my table for quite many times in different productions over the past few years.
Well, I'd love to get your thoughts on just looking at this. When you look at the poster, what do you see? Does anything jump out at you that you think the guests on our call might find interesting from your perspective?
Well, I think this is a very beautiful poster, but San Francisco Opera has beautiful posters. It has a clear the visuality is very clear, so I do like that, and I do love that there is this wedding is you know, beautifully displayed here, and yet at the same time there is hint that something is not quite right in the scene.
Yeah, when I look at it, I see that there's no faces on the groom.
Yeah.
And I guess when I saw that, I first thought, who am I marrying? Do I really know? Do I really know what's happening here? Yeah. Well, wonderful. Okay, well, thank you so much. I think that's about it for our Q&A, unless there's any other final questions from our guests. If not, I will turn it over to Peggy for closing remarks. But Sophie, thank you so much. I learned a lot. I thought it was really interesting to hear your perspective. I'm very excited to see the show. I know everyone on this call is as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It was fascinating, and I could think we could go on for another hour. But you will be able to live, if you can't get into the Opera House, you'll be able to live stream Innocence on Wednesday, June 12th at 7:30 p.m. $27.50. Just all you need to do is get on the San Francisco Opera website and select Innocence, and then it'll give you the chance of watching virtually. And our next preview will be in a couple of weeks, June 14th, Friday at 6 p.m. Partena Pei and Rebecca Plack will be our preview speaker. And next season, we will continue for the season of 24-25 with the Masked Ball on Thursday, August 29th. So hope to see you then. And all you have to do is type in on Google or your Yahoo San Francisco Opera -previews, and it'll take you right to where you get all the information about the previews and signing on their previews all over the Bay Area, both in person and virtually. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Hope to see you at the Opera House. Bye-bye.